Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar. My name is Krishna and I'll be your host, and I'm part of the TwoPage Sense team. So this webinar is going to be all about what you can learn from Booking.com's website optimization strategy and culture of optimization and how you can implement it for your business. And for this, we have teamed up with FreshEgg, who are our European solutions partner, and Duncan, who is the strategy director of FreshEgg, will be our speaker for the day. We can take up any questions during the course of the webinar, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar as well. Over to you, Duncan.
Thank you, Krishna. Let me know if there's any issues with sound. Hopefully you can hear me okay. As Krishna said, we're going to focus today on how businesses can optimize like Booking.com. Now, there are businesses that are just as advanced as Booking.com, but these guys are really vocal about their optimization campaigns and their culture. So they're a good business to focus on. I should say I've got no affiliation with Booking.com, but if they want to send me on a free holiday in exchange for this publicity, then I definitely would accept. So just a quick introduction about myself. I've been in digital for about 12 years. Half of that roughly has been in the optimization space. And I've got a background in psychology and sociology, and I run an event twice a year in Brighton in the UK, especially dedicated to CRO. I work for a company, FreshEgg, who are a CX, customer experience-led digital marketing company, and work with brands across many sectors, but I personally helped develop the conversion programs for some of the brands you see at the bottom of the slide there. And I think it's important as well to show you a slight variation to this slide, which is this one, just to highlight the fact that not only working with big brands on optimization, I've also worked with lots of small to medium-sized businesses, and they've got a lot out of the optimization programs we run for them. So it's a key theme throughout this webinar that actually businesses of all sizes can still benefit from this. What we're going to cover today is four key topics. One is what web optimization is and why it's so valuable, why we're talking about it. Then what the most successful brands are doing, with obviously a focus on Booking.com. What's prevented smaller businesses thus far doing the same and benefiting from the same approach and the same techniques. And probably most relevant is what's changed recently, what's allowed businesses of all sizes to start that process of improving their site using a methodical and well thought out approach. So to focus on the first piece, basically I'm talking about what optimization is. And I don't mean to patronize anyone with an explanation. I just thought it's important to make sure we're all on the same page, and also highlight a little bit of the opportunity size and why Booking.com invests so much time and effort in getting this right. So our definition of web optimization focuses on two key areas. So one is increasing the number of conversions, typically on a website, and this can be financial or non-financial, of course. But the second part, which often gets ignored but is of equal value, is the quality of the conversions. So typically on an e-commerce site, this is average order value. But with a lead generation site, this could simply be the quality of the leads that you're generating. So that's what we're focusing on. And something that clients typically ask when they're engaging with this kind of activity is what the potential performance uplifts are. Every site is different, of course, but it's useful, I think, to show some averages. And what we see is when a client engages with an optimization program, a structured program for at least 12 months, these are the average performance uplift figures that we tend to see. So for lead generations and non-e-commerce sites, just over 30% increase in conversion rates. And for e-commerce sites where you've got the added benefit of having order values in the equation, typically around 45% increase in revenue per visitor figures. So if you know your current performance, you know what you're currently doing in terms of conversions and revenue, then you can apply those figures to get a rough idea of what is possible. Now, whilst having a structured approach is absolutely key to this, there are some quick wins that can be had, and we'll focus on those later. But I just want to touch on something that came out of the consultancy report last year, showing that the highest performing companies are almost twice as likely as their mainstream counterparts to have a structured approach to this discipline. So following a framework and doing it in a methodical way rather than just ad hoc bits of testing here and there. And that's really critical because Booking.com say they have a conversion rate of about 2 to 3 times the industry average, and certainly they attribute that to their structured approach. Now, as I touched on, most campaigns build momentum over time, and you kind of get those gains over time. But there are those golden nuggets of opportunity that tend to arise. And one example of this is one of our clients, Mind Tools. Now, Mind Tools are publishers, and they publish content around the kind of thought leadership pieces around management skills and techniques and leadership skills. And they had this business model where they locked down half of their content, so you couldn't access any of it, but half their content was freely available. So depending on which piece of content you happen to land on, you either could view it in its entirety or you'd have to pay straight away. And we ran some quantitative and qualitative research and came up with a hypothesis that showed suggested that actually if we tested a different business model, there could be revenue gains to be had. So the model that we designed was a smart metering approach. So rather than lock down all content or half content, we actually made it all accessible, open to everybody, but we limited everybody to 3 articles a month. And we actually tested different levels of that. So we tested 1 free article a month, 3, 5, and a few other variations. But we found that 3 was the sweet spot. And this simple test, one test, delivered $1 million worth of additional revenue per annum. So whilst those gains of 30-40% are typical over 12 months, sometimes the increases can be achieved with a single test. And yeah, it's important just to highlight that fact because there are probably some low-hanging fruits and those golden nuggets on your sites that you can get those kind of uplifts reasonably quickly. So what are the most successful brands doing differently, and obviously with a focus there on Booking.com? Well, culture is a big part of it. And this test and learn culture is really about challenging assumptions and fundamentally taking a stance that you don't really know the answer to something until you've actually tested it and got some data behind it. And key to this is embracing failure and not being scared to try new things, even if they don't work initially. But of course, there's no point in failing unless you understand why you're failing. So that investigating piece is something that the Booking.com talk a lot about. And it's about, yeah, we're going to fail, but actually we're going to decide or try and find out what it was that caused us to fail so that we can refine our process over time and improve it. And they're not scared to do that. They also have this approach of decentralization of ideas and testing, and this is common among a lot of well-established optimization companies or companies doing optimization well, is that they don't try and lock everything down into one team running the program or one team coming up with all the ideas for improving the website. They want to open that up because they appreciate that actually knowledge comes from all areas. And if they can involve lots of stakeholders and get new opinions and new ideas coming through, that will ultimately benefit everybody. So the testing program, not only do they invite ideas from around the business, but they actually allow lots of other departments to test. But they just act as that expertise internally, and they support the rest of their team when they test. And sharing of results. So that 2018 report that I referenced also showed that about 75% of companies believe that consistently sharing results around the performance or the learnings from testing is really crucial to getting that culture of experimentation right and to succeeding. But only around half of the respondents said they actually did that. And this is something that Booking.com definitely do right. And I invite you to follow this link here. We just let you know we will be sharing the slides and the video of the slides afterwards, so you don't have to drop everything down. But there's some short URLs here, which this one in particular takes you to a video of Lucas Vermeer, who is the director of experimentation at Booking.com. And he talks about the culture that they have there, and especially around the decentralization and the sharing piece. So I suggest taking a look at that when you get a chance. The next bit they have, well, actually, all companies really that are succeeding here are data-led. This means that they trust data, but they also work very hard to make sure it's credible. There's no point in using data if it's inaccurate. That's just going to lead to flawed hypotheses, and it will lead to flawed results ultimately. But they do use data to guide them, and there's some great examples of that within the Booking.com company and what they talk about. A good one is that when they were setting up their new office in Germany, the obvious choice was Berlin, because that is the hub, the capital of Germany, and that was the obvious choice for most companies setting up internationally. But being a Dutch company, they felt that they could attract Dutch internationals within Germany more than other people. So they then looked at some data and found that they were looking to see where the Dutch were hanging out in Germany. It turned out that they were spending most of their time in a little ski resort called Winterberg. So that's where they decided to set up their office. So the headquarters for Booking.com in Germany is in a little town, a ski resort called Winterberg, which no one's ever heard of. But that is where the data led them, and so that is why they did it. And that's just indicative of their approach. They actually got this weak website reference at the bottom, booking.ai, where they have basically dedicated a whole site to their data science department and their work that they're doing. So a lot of the behind the scenes work at Booking.com is published on that domain. Very interesting reading. The other thing they do, this slide here is actually from the image there is from an event that they run every year in Amsterdam called Pi Data in Amsterdam. And it basically celebrates data science, and anybody can talk about any topic they like, that they're passionate about, and share that across the company, back to that kind of sharing culture piece, as I said before. And they also use their data in all their product development. So they say that they test everything, which I'll talk to you about in a second. And this is actually a slide from an event that they ran. So it wasn't an event they ran. They talked at an event last year called the Big Data Expo. And this is a slide directly lifted from their presentation, which not only shows where data fits into that process, that feedback loop of measurement through to analyze, hypothesize, experiment, but also how they use data, they extract that at key points to help them develop new products. Okay. Another thing that the best companies do is put the customer at the center of everything they do, really. And Thomas Pieter, who's a UX designer at Booking.com, puts this really well. He says that understanding what real customers need is the key to improving our product. The customer is king, and keeping your customer happy can have a significant impact on your business. And certainly, from FreshEgg's point of view, I mean, I said before, we're a customer experience-led agency. We see this time and time again, that the businesses that centralize the customer and spend a lot of time researching their needs, they tend to win. So Booking.com actually have their own lab. They've got this one-way glass room with lots of recording equipment in there. And everybody from around the company, anyone in the business, can come and use it at any point in time. And so it's back to that decentralization idea. And they currently run around 120 research studies a year, which works about 3 a week. So they're running 3 tests in that lab a week. They were also doing lots of other research. So they're doing online surveys and diary studies, street level user testing, interviews, heat maps, session recordings. And some of this we're going to talk about later. And if you're getting worried that this is out of the realms of what you think is achievable for your business, don't worry, because this is what we're going to condense down later on. I'm just showing you what Booking.com do so that you can learn from that and we can take the best bits. And again, at the bottom here, yet another domain that Booking.com have, Booking.design. And this is where they share stories from their UX researchers and their designers. And it's really great content, again, about what is happening under the hood of this company. and they're really open about what they're testing and what they're learning. At Fresh Egg, we have various different qualitative research methods, and some of these I'll talk about later. But these are the ones we typically use. A good selection, and the idea is really to get a selection of tools all telling you different stories that you can tie them together and understand what are the common threads. So we'll touch on those later. Now, Booking.com are probably well known for having this appreciation of the value of persuasion. So in particular, they use a few persuasive techniques more than others. So social proof and scarcity is one they use quite regularly. I'm sure you'll have seen these messages that appear, things like, there are 3 people looking at this hotel right now, or we've sold 6 of these rooms in the last hour, there's only a few left, that kind of thing. And I mean, they've kind of come under a bit of criticism recently. Perhaps they're overdoing it slightly, but there's no doubt that this stuff, in moderation, can be absolutely massive in terms of the persuasion and the conversion benefit that it can deliver. And there are lots of other things that Booking.com particularly are doing. So that short URL there is to an eConsultancy article which explores that in a bit more depth, so you can actually see some of the other things that they're doing on their site. Now that concept of persuasion is a key one, because it's something that we're seeing much more of these days. And it's the companies that are achieving the top results in terms of conversion performance are those that appreciate that the 2 elements of improving conversion is to remove blockers and to add persuasion. And doing that together, so implementing new designs and new content that do both at the same time, is the most effective. And a good way to describe this, a graphic that we developed that I think tells the story quite well, is this metaphor of this rocket. And the rocket is your customers, and your goal is to try and get them to the conversion point, which in this case is the moon. It's simply to buy something or to inquire. You want to get them there in as quickly and efficiently and frictionless approach as possible. And the 2 ways to do that, of course, is to, first of all, remove blockers from their path. So in this case, asteroids, but remove any sort of friction points that are going to hold them up and slow them down. So this kind of thing can be just poor usability on a website. It can be information overload, it can be lack of clarity, any of those really. But at the same time, the other way to move that rocket along is to add thrust, so to push it along from behind. And these are your persuaders. So we've talked about a couple like social proof and scarcity, but there's authority and reciprocity and lots of others that can be looked into, all that can pull the levers to persuade your customers to purchase more regularly and with more momentum. Now, actually, we just want to run a poll whilst we're on this webinar to get a bit of an understanding about what people are doing on their websites currently. So don't worry if you're not doing either of these things, but if you are, it'd be good to ask this question of which historically have you focused more on your website? Is it removing blockers or increasing persuasion? So we're just going to have this poll available. If you get a chance, can you go in and answer that, and we'll hopefully capture some good data that we can share at the end. But something else that these companies are doing, they're testing, and testing aggressively. Booking.com in particular say that everything they build, everything that goes into their products is split tested, and they have around 1,000 concurrent experiments happening at any one time. Now they have the traffic, of course, to allow for those kind of tests to be split tested. But as we'll touch on a bit later, not all tests need to be split tested. And I've been guilty in the past, I think, of trying to force split testing as the perfect solution, where actually there are certain situations where there are better methods for finding results faster. So I'm a massive advocate of split testing, and again, we'll touch on that later. But there are other methodologies that should be explored as well. Booking.com have their own in-house testing tools, and as the slide showed earlier, they have this strong feedback loop going on. So everything they learn both feeds into their product development, but also back into their future test roadmap. So they're constantly learning about what is and what isn't working, what's shifting the needle and what isn't, to understand what the next test should be. So onto the part where we explore what's prevented the smaller businesses from doing the same stuff. And I've hinted at a few things along the way, but let's explore that in more depth and look at what's actually possible as well. Analytics skill sets is a big one. There has for a long time been a shortage in the industry, skill sets around analytics and how to both understand analytics packages to make sure that they are audited well and the data is actually accurate, but also the knowledge about how to extract the right insights. There's been lots of tools available giving you lots of data, but there's been very little consensus about the best ways to get insight out of that and direct attention. So what we have now, of course, is that the industry generally has matured, and we have a lot more freelancers who are well skilled in these different analytics platforms. Agencies, of course, are available to help. And we're also finding that actually recruitable talent that you can be brought in-house to help you with these kind of things is much more prevalent now than it used to be. And also that area of identifying the biggest opportunities and focusing efforts, so understanding where to spend the time on your qualitative research, is much more agreed upon now, and it's much clearer. So I'll get into that in a second, but I wanted to share with you two useful guides which I think you'll like. So the first one, again, following that short URL there, takes you to a guide around how to conduct a Google Analytics health check. A lot of principles in there are universal across analytics packages, but it's got a focus on GA. And that will help you fix those most common bugs in terms of tracking and make sure your data is accurate. The next one is around a measurement plan. So measurement plans are basically a guide to help you figure out what metrics and what goals you should be tracking to measure your site and help monitor success and ensure that ultimately what you are monitoring, what you are influencing, is feeding into your wider business goals. It's really easy to track stuff on your site that is actually, it's nice to know, but it's not directly influencing your business goals. So having a framework, a plan that you can follow from the top level business ambitions and vision all the way down to the micro metrics about what you are tracking. Is it video plays? Is it time spent on these pages? Is it engagement with these calls to action buttons? It's the right place to start, basically. So I encourage you to go and look at that. Now, going back to the where to focus efforts and extracting value out of analytics, something we use almost on a daily basis, I'd say, at Fresh Egg, is what we call leakage reports. And leakage is a combination of simply the number of exits from pages or groups of pages on a site combined with a page value score. Now, a page value is a default out-of-the-box score in Google Analytics, but it's also available, I think it's called contribution in Adobe Analytics, and it's a custom metric that can be set up in any tool, basically. And actually, if you just Google page value, just search for that, and it will give you the calculation of how to build that metric. But combining it with exits gives you ultimately the calculation of where the highest volume of valuable users are exiting your website. So it's not just focusing on where people are exiting, it's not just focusing on where the highest exit rates are, it's telling you where the highest volume of valuable exits are. Because page value, that metric there, shows basically how important a page is, how common it is to a typical conversion pathway, and how frequently it's touched upon. So people exiting from those pages are far more valuable than people exiting from pages that have a low page value score. Things like blog pages are quite typical. If you plug a hole in a leaking bucket there, you're not necessarily going to see the kind of conversion uplifts that you need. To bring this to life a little bit, I'll show you a real world example. And this is leakage data from one of our clients, anonymized, by a telecommunications company in Australia. And it shows that we've got the page views, exit number from those pages, page value, how important that page is to the conversion pathway, and then the leakage calculation, which, as you remember, is simply exit number times by page value. And a couple of interesting insights that came out of this. First off, well, the home page is nowhere to be seen. In fact, it's not even in the top 10 pages if we carried on this list. And it's a common myth that the homepage is the most important page to focus on. It sometimes is, of course, but actually, typically we see it's not, especially nowadays where traffic from search engines tends to go deep into a site rather than touch the homepage first. So there's obviously political reasons why people want to try and improve the homepage and test that, but it's often not the highest valuable area. The first one that stood out was this page, and again, this is old data, so the iPhone 6 Plus is not necessarily the page that's going to be there now. But that in itself is interesting because it was a single product page that accounted for the third highest amount of leakage, and so there was a lot of work that could be done there to improve upon that. But it also highlights the need to rerun these calculations regularly, because 6 months after this, we wouldn't expect that page necessarily to be in the top 10, in the top 3, because trends change. So industry changes, products change, competitors change. So you want to run these kind of calculations regularly to understand what the highest valuable page at any one point in time is. The other page that stood out was this one, which was a network checker page, or a coverage checker, which wasn't even on our radar before we ran these calculations. And we found that not only was it quite a high traffic page, and it was actually contributing to a lot of journey. So a lot of people were touching this page on their pathway to conversion. It was also actually contributing to a lot of exits. So we needed to investigate it further, and we did that through some qualitative research. We did some user testing on this, and we did some heat map analysis and a few other things. And we found that the tool was really confusing. So there's no reassurance messaging talking about coverage in general. It just didn't say overall what is the coverage like in Australia. And there's no onward journey. So people were getting to this page as part of the checkout process, not being confused about how to use it, and then just leaving without doing anything else. So we came up with a variation, and this is it. So you can see here that we've got some introductory text, a bit of reassurance about how well covered the network is in Australia, and also then 3 clear next steps for progression. And what this did was it generated about a 60% increase in journey continuation through the checkout process, which, as you can imagine, the company was quite pleased with, and that was one of those big wins that we had, just from making some rather simple changes. But it wouldn't have been found without those leakage calculations. So using that data to focus and narrow attention was really important. Okay, so bringing me on to the next point around tools, so customer research and split testing tools. Historically, there's been a lot of blockers here, because there's always lots of tools in the market doing lots of different things, but they had kind of questionable quality, and you had to, of course, pay for multiple tools if you wanted to get heat maps and session recordings and site surveys and everything else. And that meant adding different pieces of code to the site, which meant having to get multiple rounds of dev and QA happening. And also you might have procurement involved, which they have to audit all the tools. It gets a bit complex. And of course, you then lead to lots of siloed data. You have data sitting in these different tools that doesn't talk to each other, and which I'll touch on later is really important. And then expense. So a lot of these tools are very expensive and aimed at more of those enterprise level customers. And that's actually a well-known split testing tool that actually still has a minimum contract of about $50,000 US dollars per year. So that just puts it out of the realms of possibility for a lot of businesses who are just starting out on their pathway to optimization. Now, of course, we have lots of great tools, some of the multi-tool solutions that allow people to conduct multiple forms of customer research in one place. And they're affordable. So they're not the tens of thousands of dollars every year. They're much more affordable, and people can actually start running some testing to get some results back, to prove the business case, and then get further investment, which I think is critical, really. And they also take the customer and the business, on that journey all the way from initial research, gathering data, through to actually be able to test it and then report on it in one place, which is really important, because missing out any of those steps means that you're running a suboptimal program. At this point, I want to jump into TwoPage Sense to show you just what these guys are doing in this space here. Okay, we'll get back to that survey in a second. So hopefully you can see here, I'm now in the dashboard in Page Sense, and you can see that there are various different analytics tools all down the left-hand side, all in one place. Right. So you can run Page Sense. You can set it up in the same way as kind of GA, Google Analytics, to set up goals and do funnel analysis. Sorry. But what I'm going to focus on today is the qualitative stuff. So the heat maps, which is one of the most impressive features of this tool, I believe. Really simple to get going with, and you can set up groups of heat maps and target it very specifically, or you can simply just add a domain in, which I've done here, and it will go away, fetch all the URLs, and go and start track every page on the site out of the box. So no need for custom setup. You've got heat map data on everything straight away, which is really great. It's a massive time saver. I'll show you one of the pages I've set up a heat map on. This is, by the way, one of our clients, Safe Site Facilities, who we've got Page Sense running on. And you can see here that very good data around interactions with various elements, the click data. You've got the standard stuff around scroll maps, showing you where people are actually getting to in terms of scroll depth and what way they're spending attention on. There's a few features that really impressed me, and one of them is this consolidated heat maps piece. So I rarely see this in split testing tools, where you can look at the individual pages, but also you can pull together all of the heat maps from around the site and show you the consolidated data, which isn't useful for in-body elements because they will change, of course, but for universal elements such as the header and the navigation, the footer, it can show you some really useful stuff. So this, actually a finding we had here was that people were really engaging with the search box, which wasn't really tracked actually. But what's interesting is when we switched to mobile, I'll show you here, what we found is actually the engagement went down quite a lot. And the hypothesis was actually that people just weren't seeing it as much, wasn't as prominent, or they were mistaking this potentially for a Zoom icon. So we're actually testing at the moment, breaking out that search into a dedicated search box, a bit like the desktop, because people are getting a lot of use out of this. The other thing that is really impressive is the segmentation abilities in here. So this stuff, you can really segment everything to the nth degree, which is rare in a split testing tool. So you can look at visitor type, source, country, browser, all the different browsers in here. You can create custom segments by building up different filters, days of the week even. And in the advanced, you've got even more, so things like URL parameters, query strings. But the one that's actually really interesting, I think, is this the user. So you can look at visitor activity, which is useful, but user, and you can use a user ID in a data layer to actually track individual users across their journeys to see what they're engaging with and how they're using the site. And then also, as I'll touch on in a minute, how that goes on to impact their conversion performance. Okay, so actually we ran a site survey on the site. I'll show you some results of the kind of site survey like this, which asked people what they'd improve about the site, basically. And we got lots of very interesting feedback. This is just one sample of what we've had recently. So people saying, I don't want to use a live chat. People frustrated that the information got lost when they closed a window. People asking for more information about costs, that kind of thing. But what we actually found is we had a few people asking or saying that they couldn't find the submit button on the site. They couldn't locate it. Which was interesting. There were only a few people saying this, but because we had the browser and the operating system and the device, and actually more recently, Page Sense have put in the resolution, which is not populated yet because it's an old survey. But we could use that information to go and find those users who met those conditions, which is exactly what we did. And we were running session recordings on the site, so we could actually see what they were doing. And I'll play you the video now of one such user. So they're navigating about, looking at imagery, and just general browsing, trying to look at more detailed images. There's actually a feature in Page Sense, you can skip pauses. So there's a long period of time where they're doing nothing, not really interacting with anything, you can skip those. So I've got that on at the moment. So it's fast forwarding pieces where there's not a lot happening. But you can see here they go to inquire and they start filling their details, and Page Sense anonymizes this stuff. So yeah, it's very good for data privacy. There's lots of settings in there that you can anonymize whatever you want, really. So there's no GDPR regulation breaking. But you can see they can't find the submit button here. So looking around for it, and you can see the kind of clicking bit of frustration. Click off it, open it again, see if it's there. Nope, no luck. So this person actually decides to try and find a workaround and goes to the contact page and starts filling in the details again. They go through the process, they fill all the details in, and you'll see that they actually then submit, which is handy, because for every person who actually gives any sort of feedback or muddles their way through this, there's likely hundreds that have just put off and leave straight away and go to a competitor. And actually, this is the confirmation page. You can see our helpful little survey here where they tell us what was wrong. So not only that, but lots of people probably actually do muddle through, but then don't tell us the feedback. So this kind of thing is probably impacting a lot more people, well, it definitely is, than just a few that reported it. And what we actually found, we emulated the conditions of the browsers where we found this problem. And it turned out that certain screen resolutions were just not showing correctly. And so there's a bug in there, which we fixed. But it affected 5% of all web users. So that's 5% of all users couldn't see the submit buttons. Some of those found a workaround. I suspect that a lot of them didn't. And so fixing that was a valuable change to make. Okay, let's jump back to the presentation. So asking users what they would like, what's improved, what they can improve upon on the site is valuable. But a lot of people reference this and say, well, yeah, hang on a minute. Didn't Henry Ford say this famous quote? If I had asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. And I say, okay, yeah. The fact is, though, that he never actually said that. It's a complete lie, and someone actually made it up. There's no evidence to back that, to attribute that quote to Henry Ford. But now I see it in presentations all over the world. I see this mentioned and heralded as this quote that he said. But it highlights the need for actually validating some of the insights and the data that you've got, of course. But even if he did say it, it's not true. And what we see commonly is that not only can that user research help you identify issues and blockers and bugs, but it can also be used to identify existing and developing needs within customers. So to give you an example of that, some of the feedback we had on the site, this Safe Site Facilities, introduced this, and people were saying, look, I want to be able to upload site plans to help me explain what I'm after, what I need. And again, it was only a few people who mentioned it over a few months, and we thought, okay, let's just investigate it a bit more, and let's just stick a little feature on the forms. So this is the standard form on the left-hand side, and you can see that we've just added this element here to attach files. Now, the interesting thing was, I think there's 4 people over 3 months asked for this. But when we built it, what it led to was, in the 3 months it's been live, about 200 people have used it. It's half the quote time for those inquirers because they're providing more information within the inquiry process. So the customer reps, sales reps can turn it around much faster. And that in turn has led to an increased quote to sale conversion rate. So yes, that's a good example there, I think. And this relates to the next point, which is around website traffic, a blocker. And there's been a perception for a long time that lots of traffic is needed to conduct any sort of customer research of any great validity. And on top of that, only sites with large traffic volumes could get good test results via split testing. That's the kind of perception that's resonated for a long time. And now, thankfully, we've got some good evidence that the customer research from even low traffic sites can yield great results, as I've just shown you. And as I'll talk about in a second, the split testing is not the only way to understand the impact of changes. So what you can do as an alternative to split testing, the thing that was most commonly done was what's called a before and after analysis. So this is making a change on the site and then looking to see if there's been any difference in your analytics data. Now, this is inherently flawed because people tend to just look at the overall results, the broad view of traffic and conversions, and say, okay, I can't see anything here, or I can see a big uplift. And of course, there are usually loads of variables that can't be controlled. So it could be promotional campaigns that are kicking off, it could be some seasonality, it could be new competitors entering the market. And what we found is that, yes, that is absolutely true, and you need to allow for that. But if you can mitigate against those, if you can normalize against those variables to a degree, so take out a seasonality effect, make sure there's been no big campaigns running recently that differ, you can still see the changes of a lot of the things you're making on the site, see the impact of those, sorry. It's not perfect, but it's something to do if you cannot run any sort of other form of testing. You still want to be able to monitor the results. The other thing that you can do, of course, is to just release to a subset of your users. So this could be just release a change to desktop users or mobile, or people using certain browsers or from certain locations, and then measure the impact from a qualitative point of view without using the quantitative data. So asking them via site surveys or via interviews what they thought of the experience and how that changed compared to the original variation. And I'm monitoring their behavior, so looking at heat maps, looking at session recordings of how they're interacting with the new designs is all good data. And what I'm certainly not saying is use it in every situation regardless. Split testing is still the best way to test. But if you've got good data informing your changes and you cannot split test, you absolutely want to be using another form of analysis to measure the impact, and that's another good one. One of my favourites, though, is what we call the minimum viable test. And a good demonstration of this is from The Guardian. So The Guardian, when they migrated over from their traditional desktop site over to a mobile-friendly, responsive site, they had this save for later feature, which was very popular on desktop, and they thought, right, we need to build this on mobile because everyone's using it. But it was very costly because there's loads of functionality, mobile-friendly functionality they need to rebuild from scratch. So someone came up with the idea of saying, okay, rather than let's build this to begin with, why don't we just stick a link on the mobile site, a little icon and a text to say, if people clicked it, it just said, thank you for your interest. We're currently building this feature. So they didn't actually build anything, but they tracked how many people were actually engaging with it. And what they found out is actually very few people wanted to use it on mobile. It's presumably because people were using their own in mobile within the browser, the bookmarking tools or their own apps for bookmarking. But whatever it was, they weren't using it on mobile. And so The Guardian saved themselves tens of thousands of pounds worth of development costs just from doing this minimum viable test. And I see these opportunities all the time now. Now that I'm aware of this, whenever I see split tests, I think, actually, is there something that we could test that's a fraction of the cost, but just can give us a bit more data to see if this is something we should explore more, or something we should just stop doing and move on to something else more valuable. So a good example there. Culture has been a blocker for a long time. So lots of opinion-led leadership has been rife within businesses. I'm sure you've all experienced it in some way, shape or form, where everything is done based on ego and just people belligerently saying, yeah, this is the right thing to do, don't need to see any data. And coupled with the fact that there's been very few conversion optimization champions within businesses making a case for this. There's actually a graphic that I like showing, which gives you an idea of the kind of hierarchy that sometimes exists. I don't think it's quite this bad, thankfully, but I can certainly attest to some of the top tier. There's some truth in there, but not that bad, I wouldn't say. But back to this, there is still there has still been that approach of being business-led in decision-making rather than customer-led. Certainly around the product and services development, people have been working on products that meet business needs and they think will be successful for the business, but not focusing on the customer. And that's been expensive. But now I'm happy to say that the test and learn culture is certainly more prevalent within businesses. And actually, a report by the Economist newspaper a couple of years ago pointed out that data is actually more valuable than oil now, and company bosses are waking up to this fact every day. And businesses, and I think, in marketing can't any longer be built on these fluffy metrics, and people actually have got a craving for hard data and ROI figures, which certainly lends itself to this conversion optimization program and culture. And of course, tools are now available to help businesses benchmark their maturity a bit better, especially in the web optimization space, and including how they're doing culturally. So something else we're going to send around with this deck is the conversion CRO maturity audit, that we use at Fresh Egg to benchmark businesses. And this covers various different categories from people and skills, strategy and culture, tools and technology, and process and methodology, and basically shows what we'd expect to see within a business at every step of the optimization journey. So we'll send that around, and I think you'll be able to use that to understand where your current business is, and then what you should be thinking about investing in time and money to move up to the next level. And before I go, I wanted to give you some tactics that you can start using right now. So the first one is around heat maps. So the heat map stuff is useful for loads of different reasons. But the one that often gives you a quick win is understanding where people are clicking around the pages. So this is actually a section of a client's site, and the link on the far right-hand side is actually the only clickable element to find out more text link. I'm sure you can guess what's coming. This is the actual heat map of how people try to interact with the page. And you can see here that the people are trying to click non-clickable elements, and actually these are the most clicked element on the whole page itself. So yeah, a bit worrying. But looking for elements that users are trying to interact with but can't is a very quick way to find those things that are probably frustrating users, and also where they're probably looking for more information. And there'll be, if you run heat maps on all your pages, you will find these things. You will find things people are trying to click on but can't. And that is a quick win, because in this example, people are clicking on the combo roundel there. You can bet your bottom dollar that they're looking for information about combo that they're not being able to get in this scenario. So introducing a modal window with more information, or actually making it clickable and going through to a deeper page would definitely help. The next thing I'm going to show you is the USP bar, or unique selling point bar. Now, one of the things that I get asked most by businesses is what the most common thing websites get wrong when they're trying to optimize their experiences. And the answer is that websites really do a very good job of explaining what they do and why customers should choose them. And unique selling point bars go some way to rectifying this, because what they typically do is sit under the navigation. They don't have to, but it's a typical location. And they really highlight the strongest unique selling points or key selling points of that business. And for this reason, we tend to recommend USP bars for lots of sites. So that's NRS Healthcare. We've got Safe Site Facilities there. Fastlek USP bar with 4 USPs in. We've got Wineware, Open University, which is a lead generation site. So these are not just for e-commerce sites. And Ride and Glide, an e-commerce site. And it's not a silver bullet, and it's not necessarily going to work for every site, of course. We don't suggest it will, but it very often does. And in these scenarios, whenever we've actually rolled it out, we've had a positive conversion impact from doing that. Okay, the last one is the confirmation page survey. So, as I talked about earlier, actually a lot of the insights we had, a lot of the survey results we've got, in fact all of them that I've talked about today, have been generated through this confirmation page survey, which, as the name suggests, is run on the page that people land on when they've actually made a purchase or made an inquiry, and ask the question for e-commerce sites, what is there anything that almost stopped you buying? And for lead generation sites, anything stopped you inquiring? And it's trying to find those things that probably have been blockers for lots of people, but actually weren't quite enough of a blocker for these users, and they give you the feedback. And yeah, it works. It's brilliant. And it doesn't interrupt the user journey. So there's no risk of putting people off because it's obviously happening post-conversion. And you can keep running all the time. So we typically have this running on client sites perpetually. And when you've got tools as affordable as TwoPage Sense, that makes sense to do it because it effectively drip feeds you new insights all the time that you can then look at on aggregate every few weeks or every few months and start to get some ideas for improvements in the site. What I want to do very quickly actually is just jump back into TwoPage Sense to show you a split test that we ran or running on a low traffic site. So this is again safe site, and you'll see here on the right hand side they've got this this request a callback form. And through some feedback, we tried testing. We tried to think about a message we could have around response rates, response times. Sorry, because that was something that was coming up as an issue for users. So we ran a split test here where we actually removed, or sorry, we added it in the original and then removed it in the variation. And you can see here that even a low traffic site, we're starting to get some results here. So 81% confidence currently, and a conversion improvement of around 8%. So it's definitely doable. And on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much, and I welcome any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Duncan, for walking us through the culture of testing and optimization at Booking.com. And a special thanks to Vaijayanti as well for managing this webinar from the back end. For those who have joined a bit late, don't worry, we'll share the recording and the slide deck over an email. Well, I'm going to quickly talk about a couple of interesting points I personally liked from this webinar. The first one being the epicenter of this whole webinar. CRO is not just for companies with huge traffic. Rather, it's for companies which wants to deliver customers' expectation. Even with lesser traffic, customer insights would play a vital role in increasing the conversions. Second point, it's one of the important points to remember, embracing and investigating failures. Talking about failures, it can be because of multiple reasons, but the most common would be incorrect research and giving importance to the wrong part. So always prioritize your goals and research accordingly, as it would be the base of any CRO process. And the second point that I would like to add is execution of change is incorrect. So you need to execute the changes accordingly and with the right data, and that concludes with the last point, which is misaligned with the customer's expectation and what's being delivered. Well, use questions to get feedback from customers and utilize the data to make the necessary changes. Well, what can I say? Sometimes we win and sometimes we learn. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And you can also find our contact details on the screen right now. Well, Duncan, David Reed has a question for you. What if you don't have a page value assigned in GA? Do we have to use the e-commerce section?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question quickly?
Yeah, sure. It's what if you don't have a page value assigned in GA? Do we have to use the e-commerce section?
Okay, yeah, good question. So if you've got e-commerce set up correctly, that will be automatically generating a page value score for you. But of course, if you've got a lead generation site and you haven't got e-commerce tracking set up, then you'll need to assign a goal value in your settings. So you go into your settings, find the goal where you set it up, and attribute a value to that goal. So that might be an inquiry, it might be a phone call, it might be a video play, anything. Now, you can just set an arbitrary value for that. So you can set, let's say, $100 or £100 per conversion. And I suggest setting a larger figure rather than a smaller figure, because you end up, the way that page value gets worked out, you can end up with too many decimals if you pick a low figure. But you set up a value and it will still then start tracking that and giving you a page value, and it will tell you the relative value of the pages. In an ideal world, though, what you do is actually work out what the value of a goal is to your business. So if you can work out how many people, once they've inquired, what they go on to actually do in terms of sales and then the revenue of those sales. So you might then actually be able to work back and attribute an inquiry, let's say $400. And then you can start actually looking at the relative value of different inquiry types, and you'd get a much more accurate page value score. But one key point to make is that you don't want to muddy the waters by having e-commerce page value and lead generation, inquiry or goal-based page value tracking in the same view in GA. You want to split your views up as one e-commerce view and then one page value for your goals separately, and that will show you the leakage both from an e-commerce point of view if you've got that, and your goals, like your inquiry, separately.
Awesome. I think Magnet has one more question. Do you have experience in mixed panel and page sense integration?
Mixed panel, I personally don't, but Krishna, you might be able to answer that. It might be one to follow up on.
Sure. So we've already answered the question about what the integration actually does with with respect to the mixed panel and page sense integration. But okay. Honestly, like you said, I don't have an experience with that integration.
No, it's not personally one that I've worked on either.
Okay.
Just thought it'd be interesting to show those results from that poll we ran. So it looks like actually Persuasion is in a higher level at the moment in terms of what's being focused on rather than blockers. Pretty even though, I would say, and that's good to see. It obviously varies based on which site you're working on in terms of what's actually going to be more effective. But it's good to see both are quite prevalent.
Great. Great. I think we have we had some interesting questions, and as you can see, you have the contact details. You can have FreshX email address, and you have Page Sense's support email address as well. Please feel free to shoot an email to us if you have any questions with respect to the product or with respect to Duncan's FreshX services as well.
Great. Yeah. Thank you all. I hope you found something useful in that. I certainly enjoyed putting it together and delivering it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you, guys.